Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. I love this part. You guys send in these excerpts, and this time we're diving into Don Quixote. And it's author Cervantes, which is really exciting for me. I don't know about you, but I've
Oh,
always...
huge fan.
Yeah. So this should be fun, and I think we're going to uncover some really interesting stuff about how this book came to be. You know how Cervantes' life kind of made its way into the story and get to know the man behind the masterpiece a little bit better. And, get ready for some surprises because Don Quixote is a lot more fascinating than I even thought it was. Like, for example, did you know that some of those early English translations tried to make it funnier by using, wait for it, Cockney slang?
Yeah, it's true. And it just goes to show you how tough it can be to really capture what a book like this is all about when you try to translate it. Because think about it, on the one hand, you've got these translations like Motillo's, where they're trying to inject humor by using this really specific, almost, like street smart kind of slang. And then on the other hand, you have translations like Gervais, which aimed for a more faithful word-for-word representation of the original Spanish.
So it's like they were trying to figure out how to make those 17th century jokes land for English readers, but wouldn't that change the entire feel of the book?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine reading Don Quixote and suddenly Sancho Panza is spouting off in rhyming slang. Moteau might have thought he was making it more accessible to the everyman, but he definitely changed the humor and the cultural context in the process. And it makes you wonder, how did those different choices end up shaping how English readers understood Don Quixote? Like,
Yeah.
were they even reading the same book?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like looking through different lenses, right? Each one kind of colors how we see this masterpiece.
Fascinating. Speaking of perceptions, though, our sources also paint a picture of Cervantes as kind of a mystery man, almost a ghost story.
It's crazy, right? I mean, you think someone as influential as Cervantes would have left a massive footprint, but you got to remember, back then, they weren't so big on documenting authors' lives.
So no one was like, hey, this guy's writing something amazing. Let's keep a diary about him.
Pretty much. It seems like back in the 16th and 17th centuries, the focus wasn't on the author as like a celebrity. So yeah, those early biographers really had to put on their detective hats, relying on little mentions here and there in Cervantes' own prefaces and digging up whatever historical scraps they could find. It was like solving a puzzle with most of the pieces missing.
Wow, that makes you wonder how they even thought about authorship back then. Like, were writers just seen as tools churning out stories and nobody cared about their personal lives? That's a really good question, and honestly, it's one that historians are still debating today. But what we do know is that Cervantes' life itself reads like something straight out of one of his adventures.
Okay, so we've got this mysterious author with a life that sounds like a swashbuckling adventure novel. I'm hooked. Tell me more. What kind of adventures are we talking about?
Well, get this. He starts out as a chamberlain to a cardinal, moving in those circles of power and influence, and then, boom, out of nowhere, he decides to become a soldier. Talk about a plot twist.
Hold on. He just traded a comfortable life for the battlefield. Why would he do that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What we do know is he didn't just join any old army. He ended up right in the middle of the Battle of Lepanto, one of the biggest naval battles in history. And he didn't just watch from the sidelines either. He fought bravely and even got injured in the process.
Wow, that's incredible. But the adventure doesn't stop there, right? I remember something about pirates.
You got it. He was captured by pirates and spent years as a captive in Algiers. And it wasn't just sitting around waiting to be rescued either. He tried to escape multiple times. There's even this whole thing about a secret garden hideout. Sounds like an action movie.
Years as a captive, I can only imagine how that must have impacted him. Like, how did all of those experiences shape how he saw the world and then, ultimately make their way into his writing?
It's a great point. You almost can't imagine that they didn't influence him in some way. And then after all of that, Don Quixote bursts onto the scene. Now, you might think I'm going to say it was a slow burn to success, but you'd be wrong.
Really, I have to admit, I did think it was a slow climb to recognition. What happened?
Well, contrary to popular belief, Don Quixote was an instant hit. So popular, in fact, that people started making pirated copies almost immediately, and everyone was scrambling to get the rights to it. Clearly, Cervantes had tapped into something special.
It really is amazing to think that a book written so long ago can still resonate with people today. But we got to talk about the humor in Don Quixote, right? Because I can already hear some listeners out there thinking, isn't it, a little silly?
But that's the genius of Cervantes. He plays with this contrast between Don Quixote's grand delusions and, the everyday reality of his surroundings, like mistaking a simple trough for a magnificent fountain. It's a hilarious mismatch of perception and reality. And he does it all with such a straight face, you can't help but laugh.
It's like he's inviting us to laugh at the absurdity of it all,
Hmm.
but also to see the humanity in Don Quixote's unwavering belief in his own version of reality.
Exactly, and it's that blend of humor and pathos that makes Don Quixote so timeless. It's a book that can make you laugh out loud one minute and then totally touch your heart the next.
Okay, so we've got this mysterious author, a life full of adventure, and a book that's both hilarious and deeply moving. But where do we go from here? What other fascinating details about Don Quixote and Cervantes are hidden in these excerpts?
Well, let's dive into some of those key moments and themes, shall we? We've got windmills mistaken for giants, of course, and Don Quixote demanding the release of princesses from a friar's coach.
Wait, princesses in a friar's coach? What's that all about?
That's a story for next time. Let's explore those adventures and more when we continue our deep dive into Don Quixote after the break.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole princess situation is a classic example of how Cervantes uses humor and satire to really highlight Don Quixote's skewed worldview. I mean, the guy stumbles upon some women in a carriage and is absolutely convinced they're damsels in distress, demands their release. It's hilarious, of course, but it also says a lot about Don Quixote's unwavering commitment to his ideals, even when they're totally at odds with reality.
So he's not just stringing together a bunch of funny stories.
Yeah.
There's a real art to how he's structuring the narrative. He's using these really specific, memorable events to make us think about bigger ideas.
Exactly. And another great example of that is the duel with the Biscayan. Don Quixote, convinced he needs to right every wrong, challenges this traveler to a duel right. But the conditions he sets for sparing the guy are totally absurd. It just highlights that disconnect between his ideals and, the practical world. And these episodes are so vivid, so memorable, they practically leap off the page, and they're still inspiring art and, pop culture centuries later.
It's like he was a master of creating these iconic scenes that you just can't forget. And they're not just funny either. They make you think you know. Like that, how often do we cling to our own beliefs even when they don't quite fit the situation?
Such a good point. It's that blend of humor and deeper meaning that makes Don Quixote so timeless. And we can't forget those more poignant moments either, like the funeral of that lovesick shepherd Chrysostom. The guy's unrequited love leads to this tragic end, and at his graveside, they read his despairing verses aloud. Talk about drama.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in the midst of all this absurdity, there's real emotion. There's tragedy in these characters' lives. Their stories might be fictional, but the feelings they're wrestling with are very human and very relatable.
Absolutely. And then there's the inn, oh, the inn. It's like this microcosm of Don Quixote's world, a place where reality and illusion are constantly bumping into each other. You've got those comical misadventures like Sancho Panza's unfortunate run-in with Maritornes, the, rather forward-serving girl. And then there's Don Quixote mistaking a basin for his helmet, convinced it's some magical artifact. It's all wonderfully absurd.
So we're seeing these recurring themes popping up, right? The clash between reality and illusion, the power of stories, the complexities of those master-servant relationships.
And those themes aren't just literary devices either. They're reflections of Cervantes' own life and times. This was a man who experienced both the heights of courtly life and the depths of captivity, someone who was uniquely equipped to explore the interplay of reality and illusion. It's almost like he's saying, life can be pretty crazy sometimes. You got to create your own reality just to get by.
Which makes you think about how those experiences might have directly influenced his writing. I mean, do you think he saw a little bit of himself in Don Quixote, clinging to these ideals in a world that didn't value them anymore?
That's a really fascinating question, and one that I think scholars are still debating. But one thing's for sure, Don Quixote wasn't just some random collection of funny stories. Cervantes was a master storyteller, carefully crafting this narrative to explore these bigger themes that still resonate with us today.
So he's not just making us laugh, he's making us think.
Yeah.
About the nature of truth, the power of belief, and how we navigate a world that doesn't always line up with our expectations.
Exactly, and that's what makes Don Quixote such a compelling character, right? He's clinging to this romanticized vision of chivalry in a world that's moved on. But in doing so, he forces us to question our own perceptions of reality. Are we all tilting at windmills in our own ways?
Speaking of tilting at windmills, I mean, that's got to be one of those moments that sticks with you, right? This larger-than-life figure charging at these everyday objects, convinced they're these fearsome giants. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But it also says so much about how he sees the world.
Absolutely. And Cervantes doesn't just tell us about these misadventures he shows us. We get those vivid descriptions, the demand for the princesses, release his conditions for the Biscayan. It's so cinematic. You can practically see it all playing out in your head.
Yeah, and even those seemingly small moments, like the reading of Chrysostom's verses, they just add this whole other layer to the story. They remind us that even in the midst of all the absurdity, there's these moments of real human emotion that ground the whole narrative.
And then there's the story within the story and Silmo's tale. It's almost like a cautionary tale about this husband who comes up with this scheme to test his wife's fidelity, and it all blows up in his face.
So even in this world of knights errant and fantastical adventures, Cervantes is exploring some very real human dramas. Things like trust, jealousy, the consequences of our actions.
Exactly. And the way he weaves all of these stories together, the humor, the pathos, the adventure, it's all part of what makes Don Quixote such a masterpiece.
We've covered a lot of ground here, early translations, Cervantes' life, the book's humor, key moments and themes. But what does it all mean? Why should someone listening today care about any of this?
Because Don Quixote isn't just some dusty old classic. It's a reflection of the human condition, our tendency to see the world not as it is, but as we want it to be. It's a story about the power of imagination, the importance of questioning our assumptions, and, that search for meaning and purpose, even when the world feels absurd. And let's not forget it's funny. Cervantes was a master of making us laugh at ourselves, and maybe that's the most important lesson of all.
So you're saying, even though it was written centuries ago, it still has something to say about how we live our lives today.
Absolutely. And speaking of connections to the past, our sources also talk about one of Don Quixote's key influences, the world of chivalry itself. We see all these references to legendary figures like Amadis of Gaul and Roland, these heroes from chivalric romances, the kind of stories that filled Don Quixote's head and fueled his imagination. It's like he's trying to live out these stories even though they're totally out of place in his time.
So it's like he's trapped in this fantasy world, but at the same time, he's challenging the norms of his society, trying to live by a different code. It's an interesting tension.
It really is. And that tension between the idealized world of chivalry and the, messy reality of 17th century Spain is a huge part of Don Quixote. It makes us ask, what does it mean to be a hero, to fight for what you believe in, even when everyone thinks you're crazy?
But even though he's clearly living in this fantasy world, there's something admirable about his unwavering belief in justice. His willingness to stand up for the underdog, even if it means tilting at those windmills.
For sure, Don Quixote's idealism, however misguided it might be, is rooted in this desire to make the world a better place. And that's something we can all connect with, even if we don't always agree with his methods. He reminds us that it's important to have ideals to strive for something better, even if it means looking a little foolish sometimes.
Which makes me think about how our own values and experiences shape how we interpret a story like Don Quixote. What seems foolish to one person might be heroic to another.
Exactly. It's all about perspective. And I think that's how Cervantes wanted it. He wanted readers to engage with the story, to question their own beliefs, and to draw their own conclusions about Don Quixote and his quest.
So it's not just about, knowing the facts about the book. It's about actively engaging with it and letting it speak to your own life.
Yeah.
What parts of these excerpts stood out to you? What made you laugh? What made you think? What maybe even made you question your own sanity a little bit?
Well, for me, one of the most fascinating things about Don Quixote is how Cervantes plays with the whole idea of storytelling. He's not just telling a story, he's commenting on the act of storytelling itself, drawing attention to the relationship between the author, the text, and the reader. It's like he's giving us a guidebook on how to read his book.
Wait, so he was aware that people might misinterpret his work, that some might focus on the humor and miss the deeper meaning.
It definitely seems that way. There are these passages where characters in the story are actually debating the merits of those books of chivalry that Don Quixote loves so much. They're questioning their truthfulness, the exaggerated heroism, how they can warp your perception of reality. It's
Yeah.
almost like they're mirroring the very criticisms that some readers might have had about Don Quixote itself.
Huh. It's like he's winking at us across the centuries, saying, hey, I know this book can be a bit confusing, but stick with it. There's more here than meets the eye. Don't just take my word for it. Think for yourself.
Exactly. And that's what keeps Don Quixote relevant after all these years. It's a book that not only entertains, but also provokes challenges and ultimately empowers us to be more discerning readers, more thoughtful interpreters of the world. It invites us into this dialogue, not just with the text, but with ourselves.
A conversation that's been going on for centuries. And based on everything we've explored today, I think our listener has definitely gained a much deeper appreciation for both the book and its author. But there's always more to uncover, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Don Quixote is like this endless well of ideas, a book that you can read and reread and always find something new. But before we send our listener off on their own quixotic quest, I think we should leave them with something extra to ponder, something that builds on what we've talked about, but takes it in a slightly new direction.
Oh, I love that. What thought-provoking question do you have for them today?
Well, we've talked about how Cervantes drew on his own life experiences to create Don Quixote, but how might our own life experiences shape how we interpret this book? What does your version of Don Quixote look like?
That's such a great question. It's like you're saying, hey, reader, this book is a mirror. What do you see reflected back at you?
Exactly. Everyone brings their own unique perspective to the story. Maybe you connect with Don Quixote's idealism, that unwavering belief in his dreams, or maybe you identify more with Sancho Panza's pragmatism, his ability to see the world as it is, even as he's getting swept up in all the craziness. It all depends on your own life, your values, even your sense of humor.
So it's not just about understanding the historical context or the literary techniques.
Yeah.
It's about making those personal connections, finding those moments that resonate with your own life.
Exactly. It's about that individual journey of discovery. And that's what makes Don Quixote such a powerful and enduring work of art. It speaks to something universal within us, even as it invites us to see the world through this unique and often hilarious lens.
Well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from Cockney slang to the nature of truth itself. It's amazing how much insight is packed into these excerpts you shared.
And we've only just scratched the surface. Don Quixote is a book that really rewards multiple readings and deep reflection. Each time you return to it, you're bound to discover something new, something you missed before.
I know I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure our listener has too. It's been quite a ride full of laughter, adventure, and a surprising amount of wisdom.
And that's the beauty of it. Don Quixote can make you laugh out loud one minute and leave you pondering life's big questions the next. It's a true testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring legacy of Cervantes.
Well said. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring the world of Cervantes. Pick up a copy of Don Quixote, dive into those stories, and discover your own unique interpretation of this timeless masterpiece.
And who knows, maybe you'll even find your own windmills to tilt at along the way.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy reading.
Well, we've talked about how Cervantes drew on his own life experiences to create Don Quixote. But how might our own life experiences shape how we interpret this book? What does your version of Don Quixote look like?
That's such a great question. It's like you're saying, hey, reader, this book is a mirror. What do you see reflected back at you?
Exactly. Everyone brings their own unique perspective to the story. Maybe you connect with Don Quixote's idealism, that unwavering belief in his dreams. Or maybe you identify more with Sancho Panza's pragmatism, his ability to see the world as it is, even as he's getting swept up in all the craziness. It all depends on your own life, your values, even your sense of humor.
So it's not just about understanding the historical context or the literary techniques. It's about making those personal connections, finding those moments that resonate with your own life.
Exactly. It's about that individual journey of discovery, and that's what makes Don Quixote such a powerful and enduring work of art. It speaks to something universal within us, even as it invites us to see the world through this unique and often hilarious lens.
Well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from Cockney slang to the nature of truth itself. It's amazing how much insight is packed into these excerpts you shared.
And we've only just scratched the surface. Don Quixote is a book that really rewards multiple readings and deep reflection. Each time you return to it, you're bound to discover something new, something you missed before.
I know I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure our listener has too. It's been quite a ride full of laughter, adventure, and a surprising amount of wisdom.
And that's the beauty of it. Don Quixote can make you laugh out loud one minute and leave you pondering life's big questions the next. It's a true testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring legacy of Cervantes.
Well said. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring the world of Cervantes. Pick up a copy of Don Quixote, dive into those stories, and discover your own unique interpretation of this timeless masterpiece.
And who knows, maybe you'll even find your own windmills to tilt at along the way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy reading